Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered here in Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Innuit, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are, of course, gathered here tonight to celebrate the launch of the first book in the Elspeth Laird mystery series, The Dead Shall Inherit by Raye Anderson. We're so grateful to Signature Editions for, of course, publishing this book and for helping to make this event a reality, and to all of you for coming down to help celebrate with us, including all of you who made a long drive to be here tonight. I'll get out of the way of these more interesting folks in just a moment, but I just wanted to quickly review the procedure for the evening. So there'll be a reading up here from Raye, which will be followed by a gentle interrogation hosted by Catherine Hunter to my left. And after that, there'll be the opportunity for you folks to ask questions if any occur to you. If you do have a question, please just put up your hand and I will wander over in a non-threatening fashion with this microphone. It's not because we don't trust you to project, it's just to ensure that those watching at home can hear your question. After that, we'll go to some closing comments from our featured guests, and then I'll be back to let you know how you can get a book signed. But for right now, I have the pleasure of introducing both of tonight's participants. We're very lucky to have Catherine Hunter on the host chair tonight. Catherine, of course, is a poet and novelist from Winnipeg. Her work includes 4 poetry collections, the novel Afterlight, the novella In the First Early Days of My Death, and 3 mystery novels, making her highly qualified to have this conversation. For 30 years, Catherine enjoyed the best day job in the world, teaching creative writing at the University of Winnipeg, and she is now enjoying retirement. Her books have been nominated for many awards, and her essays, reviews, poems, and stories have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies. Our featured author tonight, Raye Anderson, is a Scots-Canadian who now calls Manitoba's Interlake home. She has published 4 books in the Roxanne Calloway mystery series, and Then We Shall Have Snow, shortlisted for the 2021 CWC Best Crime First Novel and the 2021 WILLA, or Willa, Literary Award for Original Softcover Fiction. And Then Is Heard No More, Down Came the Rain, and Sing a Song of Summer. Here to read from her new mystery novel, The Dead Shall Inherit, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Raye Anderson.
I almost forgot my glasses. That would be a disaster. I don't know the book off by heart. Quite. All right, can you all hear me? Okay. So this is The Death Shall Inherit. The first in a brand new series set in Scotland. I just had a yen to write something about Scotland, where I grew up. And it concerns a woman called Elspeth Laird, who actually is a Winnipegger. So it's actually told from a Canadian point of view. And Elspeth she was born in Scotland, but came over here when she was about 2 years old. And she has lived here all her life, has gone over occasionally, but that's it. So she's very surprised to inherit a house from her famous aunt Deirdre, who was a writer who made the island that she lived on, which is called Sulla, famous. So Elspeth goes over to see what she's got, and that's where we're going to join her. So if you look at the back of the book, there's a boat, a McBrain's ferry boat. They plow the Hebrides island to island. And this photograph's actually taken with a boat leaving Oban, which is on the west coast. And if you know the west coast, there's Oban, and then you go up round the island of Mull, and then down the other side and into open water, and that's where you would find Sulla. It's about a 2.5-hour voyage. So she spent most of it inside, but we're going to join her as she gets to Sulla itself, and we're going to get her first impressions of Sulla and of the house that she's inherited. She met a guy called Callan MacPhail the night before. He was her mother's lawyer. She met him in Oban, and they arranged that a woman called Kath McKinnon would meet her at the pier because Kath had a key to the house. I think that's all you know, except that Deirdre's name was MacPhail and the house was originally a MacPhail house. She went back up on deck to look. Two German acquaintances were already there, standing by the rail. Elspeth had seen the outline of the island from above on the online map. It lay at a northwest to southwest angle, about 7 miles long, only 3 miles wide at this end, but widening to about 5 miles, about halfway further south. Coming at it from the sea, while the boat rocked under her feet, was entirely different. At first she saw treeless hills, a rocky coast, then a house tucked into a tiny bay, a small boat pulled up on some shingle. "Will we pass your house?" the German husband asked. Elspeth supposed they would, but she wasn't sure she would recognize it. Birds flew by, a pair of large black ones perched on a rock and sat watching, cormorants. The man passed the glasses to his wife. It was birding that had brought the couple to the island. There were cliffs at the far end to the south where seabirds nested. Puffins would be arriving soon. They hoped to see some of those. The land leveled out as the boat passed its way steadily southward. Soon it turned grassy green with rocks and sandy beaches edging the shore. "Could that be it?" The woman pointed and passed binoculars to Elspeth. A long white beach formed a sweeping curve. The land rose at the north end, closest to where the boat was passing, and a spit of land jutted out into the water, rocks at the end, waves rolling against them, throwing up sea spray. A stone pier had been built out from it. The house was up above, whitewashed stone with a dark grey slate roof, the windows set deep into the walls. Apart from those, it was plain and rectangular, as Elspeth's mother had described it. 2 windows downstairs, one bigger than the other, 3 upstairs. Those reached to the roof with gables arched over them. There was a chimney stack with 4 chimney pots. No door visible on that side, the one that faced the water. A stone wall enclosed the house. A wooden gate faced the sea. An outbuilding stood on the north side, and she could just see the edge of another at the other side. It conformed to what she had seen on the Google map. "The islanders call it the skipper's house," she told the couple. "You're very fortunate to have it," said the German woman. Before long, they approached another bay, one that cut deeper into the island. An announcement in English and Gaelic told drivers to return to their vehicles. And her travelling acquaintances hurried off to their motorhome. Some buildings lay around the harbour. Tonbost was the island's closest thing to a town, more like a village, just a cluster of buildings scattered around an inlet. There was a harbour wall built of old stone, stained green with weed and moss up to high tide level. It looked like it had been there for centuries. The boat drew into a large pier where cars could drive off. Elspeth walked out into dry land and dragged her carry-on bag towards a building with a sign that said Harbour Master, with the same written in Gaelic. A woman waved to her from behind an old white van. "Hello," she called as Elspeth drew near. "I'm Kath. Callan sent me a message this morning telling me what you look like, so I knew it must be you. Welcome to Sulla. Let's get you to the skipper's house. You must be dying to see it." All the roads on Sulla were single track. There were passing places where one car could pull over to let another one through. There didn't seem to be any rule as to which one should give way. "Och, we manage," said her driver. Elspeth sat in the passenger seat, the opposite side from what she was used to. Flat green land lay inland, dotted with sheep. On Kath McKinnon's side, there was blue water that stretched over to the hills of the Isle of Mull. "Terrible thing what happened to your auntie," Kath McKinnon said. She had the same soft accent as Callan MacPhail. "I know she was getting on in years, but we didn't expect her to leave us just yet." A small van was approaching. It tucked itself into a passing place up ahead. Kath drove past and each driver raised a hand in greeting. The man in the van watched over his shoulder so he could get a good look at Kath McKinnon's passenger. The road bent and curved following the shoreline. More sparkly blue sea, a glimpse of white sand, hillier land up ahead, not a tree in sight or fencing. Elspeth could see a building across an open field, some black cows grazing in it. Those belonged to the MacPhails, your neighbours, she was told. So there were still members of Alistair MacPhail's family living here. She knew it was Deirdre's house the minute she saw it. There was no driveway, but worn tracks ran across the grass towards a wooden garage built at the side of the house. A solid stone wall ran all around with a double metal gate. A small brown dog sat beside it. Wilma, is that you? Kath McKinnon stopped the van and got out. The dog came to her with a slow wag of her tail. This is Deirdre's dog, she said. She got her from us when she was a pup. And we said we'd hang on to her until someone could give her a home. But she keeps wandering back. Maybe you can keep her now that you're here. I'm only here for 4 weeks. Elspeth liked dogs well enough, but she couldn't keep this one. That's all? But aren't you going to be here for the book festival? Catherine pulled the car onto the verge of the road. There's going to be a big send-off for Deirdre at it. I can't, I've got to get back to Canada. Elspeth retrieved her bag from the van and followed her through the gate. The dog raced past them to the front door and waited to get in. Kath handed her a heavy metal key. You can open it yourself, she said. After all, it's your house now. The lock slid smoothly and Elspeth stepped inside. Kath threw a switch and the hallway was illuminated with coloured light. A central lampshade was made of stained glass, red, white and blue. A flight of stairs rose at the end of the hall and turned halfway up. A window above it was made of the same colours. Wilma bounded up there and sniffed around. That's where Deirdre was lying. Wilma watched over her for 2 days. Who found her? Elspeth asked. I did. She usually dropped by to get milk and I hadn't seen her. She wasn't answering her phone, so I came by. It was a shock, I can tell you. A row of coat hooks hung with jackets and coats ran along a wall. There were plenty of them. Elspeth might find a rain jacket that would do. A hall stand held sticks and umbrellas. She needn't have bought one. A rack was filled with shoes and boots, all too big for her. Pictures hung on the walls, some hanging too, all apparently Asian. A long, narrow wooden chest that looked like it might be Chinese, doubled as a bench. The floor was varnished wood and was covered by an Indian rug. The dog had flopped down on the landing and was staying there, not budging. It's a fine house, you're lucky to have it. Kath McKinnon hovered by the door. I've left milk and eggs in the fridge. You'll find food for Wilma in the pantry. I can't keep her, Elspeth protested, to no avail. Oh, she'll be no bother. She likes being home. And it's just while you're here. I've left you a map of Sulla that we give to visitors. You got my phone number. Lachi and I live just only minutes away from here if you need anything. She left and the door closed behind her. Elspeth and the dog looked at each other. She'd once wanted one of those, but never had one. Her mother had refused to buy a puppy, and work had taken her away from home. Now she had inherited one that she couldn't keep. She walked through a door into a kitchen. It was time to find out for herself what else Deirdre had left her. Whoa. Whoa.
Thank you, Raye. That was a wonderful reading. It's really great to hear that beginning, or that when she first arrives at the island and sees the house, and first goes into the house and meets the dog and the neighbor, and it has so much more meaning to me now that I've read the whole book. No, like you're setting everything up. It's beautiful. It's great.
Thank you.
So yeah, you've got quite an island there that you've created.
Yeah. Made it up.
You made it up, and yeah. So I wanted to kind of talk. Can we talk a little bit about that whole community of people?
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the island, about Sulla.
And so the setting, I found that I could picture it really vividly, like that whole setting, and I see why now too, because at the beginning we see it from a distance. And then we come in on, and I love islands, being a prairie girl. I love islands and the sea, and I can sort of hear the seagulls, you know, and coming in on that boat to the ferry. And
It's actually interesting, you know, it's interesting living on a prairie and living on the ocean isn't all that different. You've got that great big vast open horizon, you know, and there's a flatness to it. The sky matters. You read the sky all the time. You read signs of change in the sky all the time.
yeah, you get a big sky.
Big sky, and there's that sense of openness and of wind coming, and it matters, and you have to pay attention to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially if you're going out on the boat.
Especially if you're going out in a boat.
I miss the ocean. I just have to go there every once in a while. I can't be landlocked here for too long. So there's a great setting that you've got, and that includes all these people. And I was thinking about this type of book. Well, it's a mystery, but this type of mystery is called a cozy, right? Do you know that phrase? So it's it's a very odd word to use.
Except cozies don't have any blood and gore in them, apparently.
They usually do though.
Yeah, they usually do, and certainly,
I was just gonna say it's a very odd name for a genre which always has murder in it.
I find it really, I just kind of go, ugh.
But
it sticks,
it sticks. But what it does is it allows you to get to know all these people. It's always a very tightly knit group of people in the so-called cozy. I always think it's ironic. And
well, it was partly kind of, you know, that idea of, you know how you get murder mysteries that are within a kind of a house, right? The puzzle box kind of mystery. So this is just kind of an extension of that.
Exactly.
It's like, I mean, the Roxanne Calway books are all set in a small community too, but this one it's even more enclosed because they're on that island. And I mean, this island, I lived on an island for about 2 years called Tyree, and Tyree's what I describe in this island is very close to Tyree. And Tyree had about 800 inhabitants. So it's a very, and you know, it expands when summer happens. It's like Gimli, where I live now, it quadruples when the summer season happens. But during the winter, it's very tight. And everybody knows everybody, and they're all related.
Yes. So it's a great setting. It makes it a great setting for a murder mystery because, and everybody in this story, there are, like most stories, there are several timelines, but there are 2 main timelines, of course. And what happened in the past connects all these people who've known each other for years and years, and some of them, as you say, are related. And here comes a stranger into their midst.
And that was great fun to play with because that idea of having someone that can come in and ask the questions and see everything with very fresh eyes and not know what's going on, because people who grow up on islands know everything about everyone. They just don't need to be told, right? They kind of know it by osmosis. And so having Elspeth go in as someone completely different, who had to find out and had to inquire everything and tried to figure it all out, gave me the vehicle. That kind of gave me the narrative line for the book. Yeah.
So Elspeth is a very different type of, like she's an amateur sleuth who didn't ask for this crime and this mystery to solve. But your previous series with Roxanne, she's a professional police officer.
Roxanne's RCMP. And that was partly one of the reasons I wanted to do this book. I wanted to break away from that and try one where I didn't have it. So I went from the police procedural to the cozy. So it was, so I don't have this professional detective. And I wanted it to be someone who came at it from the inside, who kind of wandered into it by accident, who only as the story goes on realizes there's something wrong here, there's something maybe going on that shouldn't happen, and it happens with it. It's not a spoiler. There's practical jokes that happen that aren't quite kind,
Quite funny.
or funny, not funny, not really funny. And she begins to twig that, and it's not just a matter of people letting her know they don't want her to be there, which is what she first thinks. It becomes more and more threatening. So she doesn't realize, she doesn't really realize that something has gone seriously wrong here until quite far into the book.
Yes.
Yeah, we know, right? I mean, right off the top, we know. I mean, for the first chapter, Deirdre MacPhail was 83 and fell down the stairs and broke her neck. I mean, so it's kind of, the rule, have a dead body in the first chapter if you're writing a murder mystery.
I was gonna say, it says mystery right on the cover.
Yeah.
Elspeth can't see that, so she just,
And the dead shell, and the stinky fish too, right? I mean, something is fishy here. Yeah.
So would you, as a writer, I've always avoided the professional, sleuths, right? The detectives or police or whatever, because I didn't want to do the research. But also I wanted my people to be able to break rules and that type of thing. And I know like some people, especially screenwriters, will, if they're writing a mystery with a police detective, they will often have that detective kicked off the force right near the beginning so that they can then go rogue, right? And do all these. Yeah. But I'm just wondering how you found it, like from the writer's point of view. What are some of the pros and cons to the professional versus the amateur?
I never intended to write police procedural to start with. It just happened. It happened that, by chapter 5, I needed, in the first Roxanne book, I needed a cop. And it was happening out in the Interlake, so it had to be RCMP. And I didn't know a thing about the RCMP, and finding out about the RCMP was a whole adventure itself. I have someone who's a retired RCMP person who helps me, and it's great. And it's also really hard to keep up with what's going on in police forces because things are happening so fast. The forensics in these kind of investigations is motoring along. So now I have someone who works in forensics who helps me out. It's great, but you need that kind of, I didn't, and once I decided on Roxanne, it had to be a woman. So I thought, okay, this is a woman working in a traditionally male force, and that's maybe enough. And I don't want her to be the angst-ridden cop. She's a single mom, and that's tricky enough, right? Mm-hmm. And again, she's kind of she's the outsider who comes into a community and asks the questions. And that was always the role that Roxanne plays and still continues to play because I'm still writing Roxanne. And so she just, but the sheer presence of a police person in a community, a small community, sets off alarm bells, right? I mean, she goes, rings the doorbell and the whole village knows right away. Something is going on there. What's going on? And if they don't know, they'll make it up. So that gives a huge fodder for a book. Yeah. So this one I stayed right away from. And one of the things that's interesting about the islands is that most of them have one police person. And in this case, it's a woman called Jackie Buchanan. And the island prides itself on being crime-free. I mean, they don't need police. I mean, but the truth is they sort it all out themselves, right? And that's kind of interesting too.
Well, there's Jackie, and then there's another a male officer.
Well, they come over once an actual very suspicious death happens. Fergus comes over. Fergus Alexander comes over from the mainland, and he's a DI. He's a detective inspector. Yeah, but then again, I mean, it's still the story is all on the island, and it's all about the people on the island, and it all centers on what's going on around Elspeth.
I was going to say, the police are part of the people on the island. Yeah. They all know each other. Yeah. And we're seeing everything from Elspeth's point of view. And so we honestly don't know whether Fergus is stupid whether he's pretending to be stupid, whether things are going over his head, or whether he doesn't care, or whether he's hiding something. So I love all that.
Elspeth, Fergus has great potential. I think. It's funny, I know exactly what Fergus looks like. I mean, but a lot of the characters, I don't quite know exactly what they look like. I know what they sound like, and if I can get the voice right, I'm usually quite happy. Once I've got the voice, I'm okay. But Fergus, I've known right from the start what Fergus Alexander looks like. Yeah.
And I like what you just said about if they don't know what's going on, they'll make it up, because there's so much going on in here. Who's telling the truth and who's making things up, and
Who's making things up?
And do you have anything to say about the role of gossip in this whole like small community?
So, you know, it's partly small communities depend on each other, right? And the small community, everybody depends on everyone else, especially on a remote island where basically you can get stormed in for days on end, and where if anything goes wrong, the only resources you have is yourself. They say on it at one point, they talk about the fact that visitors come and get into trouble, and it's the islanders that have to go and fish them off the rocks if they get stuck and things like that. They don't have a coast guard. They don't. I mean, the coast guard's out in the mainland, and it's going to take 2 hours to get there. So they have to be resourceful, and that means they have to be able to trust each other. So island communities, like any small community, rely on knowing their neighbours well, and knowing who they can rely on, and what skills they can bring to a situation. So that curiosity about each other and having to know what's going on is innate in a small community, I think. And the island I lived on, Tiree, I mean, they didn't have a newspaper. They had one central telephone line, and she knew a lot. And but basically, you didn't have to do anything to get word out. You just had to say the word. I mean, one day we arrived late. We arrived after New Year, and we got off the plane and we went to the school, and the local headmaster insisted that we have a drink because it was New Year, and the caretaker came in and said, "Oh, Roy," he said, "the water pump's not working." "Oh," said Roy, "I guess there's going to be no school tomorrow." And that was all he had to say. The whole island knew that there was no school tomorrow. And by the time I got to my house, the party had started. Yeah. I mean, the grapevine was really, really very efficient. They knew everything about everybody. They knew that when we decided to come back to Canada, and I walked into the post office one day and it was raining, and she looked up at me and she said, and I said, "It's really raining." "Oh, hi," she said, "it's enough to make you want to emigrate, isn't it?" So yeah, so I mean, I knew how that word going into it. I knew that I could use that.
Yeah.
I knew I could make that word consola.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sulla is made up, right?
Sula's made up.
Yeah.
I wanted, and it's about the same size as Tiree, and it's got that flat greenness to it. But I wanted it to have some hills. I wanted it to be, Tiree's very flat and green all over. So I made it a bit like an island called Colonsay, and it's situated about, if you look on the map, it's about halfway between.
Well, it's got some quirky characters. You have, I like the one who's got second sight, I guess. She can see in the future. And she's
But they can all do that. I mean, the Scots believe in the fairies. Okay. I mean, I mean, you grow up with mist and stuff like that. I think. Yeah.
Did you say goblin mist?
Mist.
Did you say goblin mist?
No, no.
Too bad.
No. But yeah, I mean, there's just something. I mean, it's sort of interesting. I mean, Scotland's there's that whole Calvinistic side to Scotland, but then the other side is that, you know, there's Hogmanay and there's Halloween and there's. I had an old stepfather, and he walked up a hill, and he was a man of God, I'll have you know. But we're walking up a hill with my 2 little girls, and he pointed at a tree that had a hole in it, and he said, see that tree? See that hole in the tree? That's where fairies live. And you don't want to go there, no, just stay away from them, just leave them there, but they're there. And I mean, they believed every word, right? And yeah, so that idea of the wee folk,
Right.
Yeah.
They cause a lot of trouble.
and yeah, and yeah. And I mean, again, she's probably making it up. I mean, there's a fair bit of malice involved in the person who's telling everybody that the house is the house is
Cursed.
damned, it's cursed.
The house is cursed, so it's not, but it's different from being haunted.
It's not haunted, it's just bad things happen to people who live
Yeah.
there.
And,
Yeah, you don't want to live there, you don't want to keep that house.
Yeah.
Bad things happen to people who live there.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful house. It's great descriptions of the house and the belongings in it. And I think it's the object of desire among several people on the island.
Especially the MacPhail family. They really
Yeah.
think it was theirs. They also want the pier. They also want the pier because the piers, having an anchorage on an island is really important.
So there's all kinds of connections between these people, and there are several threads that are just sort of beginning, I feel. And I'm just wondering, do you have any ideas? Are you going to set another mystery on that island? I know you're going to continue with Elspeth, but I wonder if you're going to go back to that island, or maybe you don't know yet.
About, I think I might.
You might.
Yeah. I think Callum MacPhail, who is one of the characters on the island, he's out there all the time, and there's too many connections that I've set up that I want to kind of follow through on. I want to find out what happens to some of them. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, that sounds good.
And I want to find out what happens to the house.
Yes, me too.
Because I still don't know what happens to the house.
So there's a character in this novel who lives on a little island like this and writes about it in her murder mysteries. And I was wondering if there's any real life connections at all to being a mystery writer who writes about her own small community.
Something I think about a lot, and it's one of the reasons why I chose to make the island fictional. And it's also the reason why the Roxanne books are in fictional places. They're close to places, the Deirdre Lake that we all know. But I made them fictional because I did not want anyone to think that I was writing about anyone who was real there. People think I am. I mean, people will walk up to me in the grocery store and tell me that, oh, I know who that was. Yeah, and they're wrong, right? Because they're not. It's all made up. But there are things that people do that I borrow. And there's ways of speaking that I borrow. So I think you have to be careful about what you say about a community. I don't think, and especially if you're saying that a community like Sulla, that there's something going on in Sulla that's not really all that that's difficult. One of the things that's going on in Sulla is that Deirdre, the aunt who left the house to Elspeth, was writing about the island, and she made it very famous. So one of the things that I'm playing with in here is the whole idea of if you make an island famous by writing about it, what's your responsibility to the island? And in her case, in the island, some of the islanders think it's great that she wrote about the island, but many of them don't. Many of them feel that she compromised their way of life. Because of her, people have come to the island, and it's now become a very popular island, and that changed the whole culture of an island. So what responsibility do you have to that? And I think that's just an interesting question to play with.
Yes, that's another dynamic, that's a movement that's happening in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Is that this place that used to be so isolated and just cut off from the world is now becoming a tourist attraction. And now they have this writers' festival coming in. And so it's really changing, so.
It's completely changed it, yeah.
So some people don't like that, some people do like it, some people profit off it, whether they like it or not. And, but there's also that underlying, you don't go into it too much, but underlying idea that if a writer is coming from a community and writing with that community, they're giving away secrets or they're betraying people. And I think we've seen that in Canadian literature a fair amount. I don't think it's true that the writers are betraying their neighbors, but I think some of the neighbors have often thought that.
And that's where I think you really got to be careful. I mean, I think it depends how close you are to the actual story. I think there's elements of the story that you can cobble a story together differently, and then you make it your own. But if you tell the story the way it was told to you, it's still that person's story. And I think at that point you have to ask permission, right? I mean, there's two things in the very first Rock Sand Gallery. They're not stories, but there's descriptions of. Well, the first Rock Sand book opens with two people going to the local dump, and I based that on two friends of mine, and I went and asked their permission to do that. So I made sure I did that before I published it. And I would have changed it if they were uncomfortable with it, because I just thought I had to do that. So yeah. I think, yeah, it's at what point does fact become fiction, right? You have to fictionalize it, yeah, to make it work. So I make the island fictional, and then that way the characters are fictional.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm always interested in the writing process. So I don't know I didn't even ask your permission ahead of time if you want to talk about this or not.
That's okay.
But I'm always interested in the research process and the writing process of any writers I'm talking to, like where do you begin? Did you come up with the character first? Now I read somewhere that you with the Roxanne, the first Roxanne Calloway, it started as an exercise that you were doing.
It was an exercise. It was a writing exercise.
And can you talk a little bit about
it was a writing exercise to write something in a style that you read a lot of, and this is a familiar story by other people who write crime fiction. That you look at your bedside table and you go, oh gosh, look what's there. So and I had to go at it and it worked. So then it took off. Well, how do I start the book? I need to know where it starts, and I need to know where the body is. And the first book started with I woke up out of a dream with a picture of a foot sticking out of a snowbank, and that was it. This one, I knew a house like the house in this one. This house is a lot of people who live on islands, the older son will inherit the croft, the farm. But then the younger sons will go to sea. And in this case, Captain MacPhail went to sea and did very well. He became captain, and he brought back stuff, and he filled the house full of stuff from. He has carpets that are made to fit, that are hand-knotted Indian carpets, right? And that's actually based on, I actually saw a house like that in Tyree. I had a friend in Tyree who was elderly, she was a retired school teacher, and she had actually gone to sea with him, which is really unusual. I mean, that old superstition that a woman on a ship's unlucky still holds. But she did it, and on the way out she would order the carpets, and on the way back she would pick them up on the way back. And so the house was for real. And again, but the stuff that's in it is not quite what she had. She had a lot of Brazilian silver. I didn't do that, so I just changed it around a bit. But I knew I wanted to write about that house, and I thought, okay, if that house is there, then that's where the body is, and then the body's coming down the stairs. Yeah, it was pretty logical from there. Yeah,
for a look in the treasure.
Yeah.
So
research, Google. I mean,
really?
I mean, you can find all kinds of stuff. I mean, you can find, it's interesting when you start researching methods of death, but yeah, that can be tricky. Yeah, I once had to find out how long it took for a body to bleed out, and I began to get really kind of interesting responses from the algorithm. But yeah, and I actually, when I started this book, I did think about writing it from a Scottish point of view, but I knew that if I did it, I had to go over there, and I had to really immerse myself in Scotland. I need to get the smell of Scotland back. I just needed to get the feel of it, and it wasn't going to work unless I went over and spent a fair chunk of time there in that area, and doing that just wasn't going to happen. So you can do a lot of it online. I mean, you can Google Maps is great, right? You find out all kinds of stuff. So you can visit it in a way, but again, I couldn't have written it unless I'd actually lived on an island. Yeah.
You can get facts from Google.
You can get facts from Google, and you can check things out, but ultimately, yes, you have to have lived it. You really have to really know it.
I agree. Yes,
Yeah, you really have to know it.
And don't you ever, like, I read a lot of true crime and follow a lot of trials, you know? And so many times the police are now looking at the person's Google search to see their suspect and see, is he saying, how long does it take to bleed out, or, you know, like, are they searching all this? So, I don't know, and I myself, well, at one point I was writing about the war, so I had to know all this about explosives and guns and everything. And I remember thinking as I'm doing all these searches, like, hope nothing happens. And I hope I can get this book published, because then I'll have an excuse for my searches. But anyway,
When I wrote the first, when I realised I needed to find out about the RCMP, first strong exam book, I phoned to give me the RCMP, and I got this very nice, helpful constable. And he said he helped me as far as he could, but and what I really wanted to know was what rank of officer would be sent out to investigate a murder in a place like.
good question.
Yeah, and I couldn't get the answer. And he said, well, you'll have to phone headquarters and talk to someone in communications. So I got Staff Sergeant Ryan, who was quite helpful, but began to get quite suspicious, and said at one point, this is fiction we're talking, madam. And it was just that kind of that. I wonder, I thought, if anything happened here, I mean, am I going to have this guy knocking on the door, wondering what I got up to? Yeah. So yeah, you have to be careful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Should we see if people have questions? Anybody have any questions for Raye? Should be happy to answer.
Unrelated to how long it takes a body to bleed out.
Congratulations, Raye, on your book.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to reading it. Can you talk to us about your cover? How did that arise?
Oh, well, there's a dead fish in the book. You'll have to read it. You'll find out. It's a Scottish fish. We did start off. We had a really nice, beautiful trout to begin with, and that's a freshwater fish. So I had to get changed to a sea fish. So it's a cod.
So I was just wondering. Do you want me to say?
It's just to speak into it so that people watch it.
I've got a loud voice.
Oh, it's just for the people watching.
Oh, sorry. So where are they? Where do I look?
Oh, it's being live streamed, so you're not on camera. But
Oh.
just to get the question.
I enjoyed your book so much.
Thank you.
But here's the thing. Does everybody here know what a Tunnocks caramel wafer is?
And you know what Thomas caramel wafer is, eh?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can buy them at Walmart.
Oh.
Tons of caramel wafers, milk chocolate and dark chocolate. That's so good.
And there is one in the book.
Hi, Raye.
Hiya.
I know that you were going to be moving to Scotland and that didn't happen. I'm wondering if this book is a way for you to go there.
You know, it is actually. It's a way for me to visit Scotland in my head. And it's, well, those of us who emigrate, right, I mean, we're hybrids, right? I love this country. I'm really glad I live here. It's my adopted home. Love it to bits. And I also love Scotland. And so being able to go back and visit Scotland in my head is a treat. And just getting back into the language of it, you know, being able to kind of hear those voices in my head. And it's like I've got this whole bunch of imaginary Scottish friends to go visit with. And, but it's also, I mean, there's a huge Scottish crime fiction tradition. And it's kind of, I think this book kind of owes a lot to that tradition. Yeah, it feels like it kind of belongs in that pod.
Speaking of the Scottish traditions and language, there's a lot of dialect throughout Scotland, lots of different voices, different accents. And was it a struggle for you to stay true to the language that you did in this particular?
I actually was really careful not to use it too much. I mean, I think there's only 2 Gaelic references in the book. And I mean, people in the Highlands and Islands speak a very, very beautiful, exact, precise form of English. It's absolutely lovely to listen to. They talk about the lilt of it, right? And it does, it's musical. And so writing that's simple. I didn't use very many Scottish words, Scots words. I think if they're used, they're fairly obvious. I think someone's told not to fash themselves at some point. I think I did use Drich. A Drich day is one of those kind of wet, dismal days. The Scots have all kinds of names for rain, you know, but that's like, so yeah, but it's the way people speak to each other and the way that they actually, it's the directness. There's a directness in how they speak to each other. And I wanted to keep that. So yeah, it's there. I mean, it's interesting because I do actually in the book talk about accent quite a bit because, I mean, there's, Elspeth has a cousin who's Edinburgh. And in Edinburgh, there's a very precise way of, a very a more formal way of speaking. And then there's a Glaswegian, and in Glasgow they talk the wrong down like that, you know, there's a different accent. And I went to live in the Scottish borders when I was 11 years old, and my mother threatened me with instant death if I got border accent, right? And it took me 2 weeks to become bilingual. And I can still talk it like that, it's like that. It's right border talk. And so I didn't go that far, but there's something about just getting back into that old language that's wonderful. Yeah.
And were there any other questions before we go to closing comments? Oh, please.
How did you come to the title that you have made?
Well, I was kind of, it's partly biblical. I mean, I grew up in Calvinist Scotland. We all went to the Church of Scotland. So I grew up with the King James Bible, the weak shall inherit the earth, right? But it's not entirely that. There was a song that there's a there's a hymn by John Bunyan, the pilgrim, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress. And it's who would true valor see, let him come hither. It's a wonderful old hymn, set to music by Rafe Williams. It's really brilliant. And we sang a lot. I sang in the church choir when I was a kid. And I sang that hymn. And the third verse goes, hobgoblin nor foul fiend shall him, hobgoblin nor foul shall daunt his spirit. Hobgoblin nor foul fiend shall daunt his spirit. He knows he at the end shall life inherit. And it was only after this popped into my head that I realized that was the link. But there actually is a narrative link to this title in the book as well. Yeah.
And does anyone have a final question? Oh, yes.
How old were you? How old were you when you started writing?
Writing this? Well, I've been writing a lot all the time, right? But I wrote the first Roxanne book. I was 74.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's an amazing. It feels. It's quite. I can't quite believe it that at this point in my life, something popped up that was like, hey, guess what? You can do this, and it's really good fun, and it's given me a whole late career that I never expected. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Sorry, we do have one more question. We can talk about.
I was just wondering what you did for all those years before you started writing. What was your occupation?
Drama. I was a drama teacher. I taught drama and I ran the theatre school at Prairie Theatre Exchange for about 15 years. I taught creative drama to kids every morning for 20 years of my life, and you make up an awful lot of stories when you're doing that. Yeah. I made up a lot of plays and things like that with kids. Yeah. So it's always been there. That and storytelling's always been the core of everything I've done. Yeah. And the grandfather was a storyteller. It's just.
That was actually my last question I was going to ask about your background in drama and theater. And I think I was just talking to somebody the other day who was talking about how all artists have a kind of second art that they want to do or are pulled towards, and because all the arts have something in common, and definitely storytelling and setting the set are drama.
This is such a dramatic form of narrative, right? It's so plot driven, it's so action driven, it's so character driven. It's so dramatic. The whole structure is dramatic. So that's probably why this form fits for me best as a writer.
Well, thank you all so much for your questions. Thank you both. Do you have any closing comments you might like to offer?
I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming. I am so thrilled to see all of you here, and thanks for the questions. And thanks for being interested in my book. And thanks also to John and everybody else at Valleys. And to Karen at the back there, who is my publisher and who is wonderful, the Signature Editions, and Ashley, our marketing person, without whom I would be lost many times. And Doug, who I don't think Doug, my editor. I mean, the whole team is fantastic. I have been so lucky to be taken on board by this crew. Thank you for coming and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Joy.
So we will now move along to the signing portion of the evening. So we will dramatically relocate Raye from that chair there to this chair here. There will be one moment of chaos while a few folks peter out and then other folks just line up down this aisle. Please do feel free to come up and get a copy of the Dead Shall Inherit signed. You can get it signed before you pay for it. Just please do pay for the book before you leave this hall. I'll ask you one more time to join me in giving a very warm round of thanks and applause to Signature Editions, your host, Catherine, and of course,